Stop number 3 of the Bassmaster Elite Series season heads to Florida. Who are we picking for fantasy fishing, and who should you consider for your team? That and more on episode 172 of the Inside Bassmaster Podcast. Kyle, Jessie, my co-host like usual. I'm your host today, Ronnie Moore. And Kyle, let's get right into it. The Harris Chain of Lakes, man, a place that I talked to Tommy Sanders about it, lured in Bassmaster history, but on the elite level, not so much. Only 3 previous visits. We had the 2022 Elite there where Buddy Gross won, but prior to that, it was like 2011 and 2009 or something like that. So really, if you've came up through the high school, college, nation, team, opens route, you fish the Harris Chain frequently. If you're just an Elite Series only angler, you might not know that much about it.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, we were just talking about it in the office. One of the more historic tournaments of the last handful of years was the 2020 college championship there at the Harris Chain. Obviously, records were broken there, and some records, college wise, that I don't think will ever be broken. Really, I think as far as a 3-day event, because now obviously all the regular season events are 2 days. So
But it
it's
also holds the 2-day record too from the next year or two in January.
That's a good point. Yeah, Giant Bag, Messer, two of the teams, the 2 teams that won those events are highly classified now. One being an Elite Series angler, the other being an EQ angler that just fished the Bassmaster Classic. So if you haven't bought into all of our college fishing talk, there's another token for you to take home with you. But yeah, the Harris Chain's a great fishery. That was one of the tricky things about fantasy fishing, which I know we're going to get into a lot here, but making picks for the Harris Chain, not a ton of history unless guys have fished opens there and things of that nature, and no history really to speak of fishing it this late in the year. So it's something I'm curious to hear your opinion on. I'm sure I'm not the only person out there, but when I was making my picks, I was like, I don't know what's going to happen. Like, I don't even know what to expect, really. Like, rarely do we get these tournaments where you feel like you're a little unfamiliar with what the pattern and the things that are going to play out for. Like, is there still going to be fish on beds? Are they all gone? Like, guys always still find them on beds if it's still in the springtime. So there's so many things to consider, and to me, it's what makes it such a fascinating tournament. Should be a really fun one.
Yeah, honestly, we talked about, the people who maybe have experience in it. The opens anglers fish there once a year, basically. Sometimes it's in January, February, sometimes it's in October to end the season. And that's what it was last year. So rarely do we have a group of rookies that know a body of water. It's like if they did Eufaula, Oklahoma, and the rookie class, like we hadn't been there much at
Sure.
all in bass history. So the opens rookies that are on the Elite Series would know it better than the seasoned pros. And so that's what we're seeing with the Harris Chain is a lot of reps on that body of water for a lot of these anglers, especially the younger generation. And if you've just exclusively fished the elites, you may only have one time of doing it, and that was 2022. If you're an OGer like a John Cruz or some of those guys, you would, and Greg Hackney, you would have fished it, in those other previous times. But you have to remember the other previous times, it was the harshest cold front in the history where Brian Snowden had an insurmountable lead and then lost every bass that short striked his Texas rig and zeroed. And Mike McClellan comes out of nowhere with not even a giant bag, just a regular bag, and was able to win because the leader zeroed on the final day, how tough it was. And then the other one was one of the best bed fishing tournaments with Shaw Grigsby winning in the back, cul-de-sac canal, a deep hole where fish were sitting from the winter coming up. But then also the ability to do terrible and then improve your day was huge. I think Grant Goldbeck finished second and was like, he had like 2 pounds or 0 pounds one day, and then 30, and then like 30, and then was right there in the mix on the final day. So, Florida is fluky like that. It is tricky. But I
It's
do
easy. It's easy to predict the winning weight off by like 40 pounds too. I mean, we've seen that
shut
happen on
up.
this very
Yeah,
podcast.
we have done that indeed. But I will say, but April is much more of a fishing month and things are stabilizing, less weather dependent for these fish to move in stages, a lot more stability. And you're not putting all your eggs in one basket if you're worried about a cold front stalling something. The odds are it's going to be a cool front or it could be a cool period. It's not a full front, but just a little downturn in the weather. So we'll keep an eye on that. But yeah, let's get into it, man. Harris Chain of Lakes is 8 different lakes. If you've never checked out this body of water, maybe you're new, maybe you've seen the broadcasts of past events there, but you're like at any given point, we almost have to have like a designation, like so and so is fishing Eustis or Griffin as they move because you it looks similar, but someone could be in a Popka far from takeoff. They could be in Griffin through a lock. They could be in another lake through 3 or 4 idle canals. Or you could be right by takeoff. And if you took a sample, it would look similar everywhere. So 8 different lakes. We start out in Venetian Gardens. That's the takeoff. OG place. I mean, people know Venetian Gardens just from the name, and they've never fished the Harris Chain. They just know that that's the takeoff spot. So Venetian Gardens is right there in Lake Harris. And on the far east side of Harris, you have Little Lake Harris, and they do classify those as 2 different bodies of water. A huge bridge crosses that lake and splits the two. We saw the Banana Cove region and the pinch down, the neck down point area where Buddy Gross also was fishing off to himself. That is on the far east side of Harris Chain or of Lake Harris before you get to Little Harris. If you do go right from takeoff through the Idle Canal, there you have Eustis is the lake that you have to go through. And then if you go to the west continually, you'll go through Haynes Creek to lock into Lake Griffin. That is the farthest west you can go. But if you're in Eustis and you take it to the east a little more, you'll go through the Dora Canal and the Dead River. Those are the 2 canals that connect the lake to each other. You'll go from Eustis to Dora, and then you'll jump into Beauclair and Carlton, and then those are very small, what I call a connecting lake, and then you go through the Apopka Canal, the Beauclair Canal to get to Lake Apopka, a 3-boat lock that'll get you into a place that really has never been on the radar of tournaments there, and or it was considered the most dead lake in the state. And then with a lot of efforts, it has had a revitalization and it has factored in a lot of our Harris Chain tournaments the last 3 or 4 years.
Yeah, I mean, when you were talking about Apopka, that was the one thing, the last time we were there, was kind of a wild card. I got sent up there on day one to cover the lake. And I didn't know what to expect. Like I was sitting there just looking at the map thinking, I wonder if anybody's even coming up here. And sure enough, a lot of boats went up there.
The
And
lock opens and you see some come out,
right. Yeah. You're just like sitting there thinking, thank goodness we didn't make this trip for nothing. Basically drove to Orlando just to get there. But, it was surprising how many boats actually ended up being in there. And the best I remember, Scott Martin was in there, Brad Watley, Matt Robertson, Greg DePalma. There was a lot of boats that actually ended up in there. And a handful of those boats obviously factored.
Combs.
Yeah, I actually factored into the tournament. Jamie Hartman did well in the tournament. He was in there. Um, so yeah, that's the thing is like, you could basically just draw a name out of a hat of any of these lakes. And like, for all we know, like it could be any of them. Like there's certainly lakes that, may be hotter than others on trends, but Apopka being the perfect example of what you just mentioned, in years past, you would think Apopka would not even have a factor whatsoever. And I even know that in some of the college tournaments and things of that nature since, Apopka has played a more significant role. So, absolutely, stunning how much water there is there. And then, how many lakes and all the connecting rivers and all the things you went through. If there was a quiz at the end of all that you just went through, I think, most of us would probably fail unless you fished there. But, no, it is a special fishery. And that's the thing that is super interesting is like, we really don't know where it'll go down. Like until the tournament starts, we'll kind of be wondering which lake's going to be the hot lake.
Yeah, and oftentimes that's grass dependent. Where is the good grass growing? It's something that I remember. I always pick up something from a tournament and or from an angler and remember it forever. And that's what Fighter, when he was practicing or not practicing for the AOI championship at Mille Lacs, he talked about, I don't really have to practice Mille Lacs because boulders don't move. those fish are going to show up to similar boulders, or if I check a boulder, I know I can go in rotations and find other boulders. But he's got to practice Minnetonka, because the grass could change, or you have to relearn some of these lakes. So there are lakes that have different character traits, but depending on how the spraying goes, how the seasonal growth is, which lake has what kind of grass, will often determine where we see a big portion of our anglers. And so, and the strategy of it. I kind of pitted, can the guys with 4 hours compete on a Popka with someone fishing 8 hours at Harris? Can you compete? You better make a good strategy. You could pick a guy in fantasy fishing as thinking he's the safe guy, and he's going to be headed to a Popka, and he could get boat 87 day one, and he doesn't go to a Popka where he's been practicing and he's got to survive day one, or he's got to go straight to the lock and wait. That's the big problem. When you do lock, there's no guarantee the lock's going to work properly and get you back through, or something could happen. And so you're injecting chaos into your game plan versus staying still, staying put. So we've got multiple types of grass. You've got the pencil grass, the pencil reeds, the Kissimmee grass, that kind of stuff on the bank. You've got eelgrass, hydrilla, those types of vegetations offshore. I often think that, Harris has a mixture of both. It's got some hard spots. Harris has seemingly, now Griffin's got some deeper water and stuff too. Harris has like the deepest water. That's where we saw Buddy Gross kind of fishing like the shallowest area with the closest access of deep water of any place on the chain. You've got some offshore characteristics there, but you've really got offshore characteristics at Dora, Beauclair, Carlton. Those lakes have good offshore characteristics. Maybe Apopka does as well. We often see a lot of guys implore shallow water techniques there up on the bank, up close and personal. Griffin seems to be an offshore grass deal most years. You've got that main area right outside of Haynes Creek. Once you go through the lock, that grass to the north, grass to the south, kind of a big area where the possibility of a big grass flat would grow. You've also got the south end. You've got canals on a lot of these lakes as well, which could factor. And then Eustis is seemingly it's had its moments to shine. Every one of these lakes has had its moments to shine, and it's the hot lake to be on. And Eustis, I got to see, the era when Whitney Stevens in 2019 busted the biggest bag in Bassmaster Open's history at the time there. Offshore clumps of eelgrass, maybe some hard spots nearby, but those isolated clumps of eelgrass were key for him. And it's not like it's a deep grass. It's like I can throw a spinner bait and be able to cover it. I can throw a chatterbait maybe and get around it. You can also fish other baits, traps for those longer spans of it. So every lake has some kind of characteristic that you can do. You also got to consider the lakes that do have those canals. There's not much water current flow, let's just say. But when you do have those canals that connect to one another, the entry point of those canals will create a consistent flow of water. There is going to be flows of water and current, and so fish will normally stack up. There will normally be hard spots outside the mouths of those canals, and so we'll see some of those things factor as well, which gets dicey on the weekend when there's a lot of boats idling through, just hanging around. So I'm excited about the Harris Chain. Like we said, April's never been a month we've been there, but I feel like April, in my opinion, and maybe your opinion, April, May are great, maybe the best fishing months in Florida, whereas maybe January, February, or early March could be the best sight fishing months. The actual best fishing months could be April, May.
Yeah, that's one of the things that, again, that like I was most interested in, is, when you look at national tournaments that we've had at Bass and other trails, of course, there's just so limited resources to, what it's going to be like, at least Harris Chain specifically. So, like, what would be your prediction? Like, I'm curious myself. Like, obviously, your dad lives on the Harris Chain. We haven't even mentioned that yet. He's going to be my boat driver more than
I
likely.
caught one off his dock the other day when I was down there.
Nice. You can't beat that. But like, when you're saying just fishing, like you're suspecting that it's going to be mostly just fishing shallow vegetation or still fishing offshore grass and shell beds. Like, what would be your prediction? Because it's hard to predict as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, I really feel if you remember the coverage we did last fall, Tyler Lubot didn't win, but he got a top five. And he had, I felt like, a really good game plan of he did fish slower. Maybe it was a Carolina rig, maybe it was just a Texas rig, maybe it was a jig in those, you know, mouths of canals where currents flow and hard spots are present. There's some grass probably sprinkled in as well. Groups of fish. That's where groups of fish can gather, and they're obvious places, but because there's so much traffic, they're so obvious that they're almost overlooked. People are trying to find that secret shell bar where those always will have fish, it seems. And so he did that well. He also had a chatterbait deal going, in more of like a canal style deal that grass that Matt Messer was fishing. So Matt Messer wins the tournament. He's throwing a buzz bait around Harris early in the morning, catches a big one day one, or catches a couple big ones day one. Day two, he catches a 6 pounder. Then he goes to Griffin and is able to flip lily pads and stuff the rest of the day. There's a lot of different ways to play, but I feel I got to talk to Eric Panzeroni, and if you don't know Eric Panzeroni, got to cover him in the opens at times on various lakes on the Harris Chain. One of the best anglers on the Harris Chain. Tim Frederick's another great one that I'll be leaning on as well, just for some intel. But from talking to Panzeroni, we're shooting this podcast right before the weekend, before the practice starts. So it's not like this might air on like a Monday. We're shooting this prior to them starting practice, but what he said is that it's been taking less than 20 pounds most days. Like there was a 3 day event down there. I think it was a Toyota. It wasn't a great weight, honestly. It was I think Mikey Kiso won, but it wasn't enormous weight. Like you normally stink and have 9 to 12 pounds and you drop out of the top 10. People were like maintaining a fifth place position after a good day and then a 9 pound day. So it was kind of a weird deal. But Panzeroni said, 20 pounds has been good, but the weekend, basically 9 or 10 days before the elite started, or the elite will start, boom, a 31-pound bag, a 24-pound bag. Some of these bigger bags are starting to show up again, which is great because we're normally like, that's what I expected when we showed up last time. Like, but it's like it seemingly stopped and then it went in a downturn at our elite there. So Panzeroni said the big fish are starting to show up. He talked about, I'll just go ahead and read it. Some of those connecting lakes that I call it, Dora, Beauclair, Carlton, those lakes will have people definitely fishing maybe offshore brush, hard spots, shell bars, things like that. Um, but as I look up his text real quick, he was talking about the topwater bites starting to fire up. That's why I think fishing could be a deal. You could see a guy throwing a buzz bait or a frog or a walk-in bait, something like that, starting to catch some fish on it maybe early in the morning. And then you'll see that guy and he's going to start flipping docks that have grass around him, or he's going to go in a canal and pitch around, or he could go and spinner bait around some shallow stuff, chatterbait around. Like I feel like you could do a couple different things and you're gonna need to rather
Well,
than
that's
just imploring like one spot like Buddy Gross, like fishing offshore. But Buddy kept it honest with a lipless, with a swim bait, with a Carolina rig, like so he kept it honest bait wise. But I think you're gonna have like you can't run around too much in Florida, but like you could have which lake has multiple recipes that I can work with.
that's actually like word for word in my fantasy column is what I suggested. Is like it feels like a lot of times, like when we get to the tournament that I use as an example in my head was like Eufaula in 2020. Okay, so naturally, even like comparatively, that was further along in the year. Obviously being what was in
Another
June, I want to say, but
another
it was
Buddy Gross victory.
but it was like it was one of those tournaments where a lot of guys did multiple things, like you couldn't solely rely most of the guys in the top 10 didn't solely rely on just fishing offshore. You had guys like Matt Airy and certain guys that were running both patterns. And to me, that's the one thing that I kept going back to in my mind when I was making picks. And again, I'm just shooting from the whim here on some of these, but is having multiple patterns because of the changing conditions. Obviously, it's still spring, but there's certainly going to be plenty of fish to be caught. I imagine still fishing shallow, like you said, fishing docks, fishing canals, fishing whatever it may be, shallow vegetation. But obviously, like Harris Chain in general has been so historically good fishing offshore, at certain times of the year. So you know that both of those things will probably factor. And it seems like, at least just from a surface level, like guys that are able to do both, or have two or three different patterns, and like you said, be able to maximize, one lake or one general area of a lake, really will have a good chance. So it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out. But I'd be willing to bet that, some of the guys that make it to Sunday will have multiple patterns that they have to rely on.
Yeah, and Panzeroni was, mentioning with me that Griffin actually does have good grass. We saw that in the fall with Tyler Williams. We saw that with John Sokup was down there. Matt Messer obviously was in Griffin. I think Mike Mayo, who wasn't on live but finished in the top 5, he was in Griffin. So there was quite a few people doing well in Griffin, and I think Griffin is underrated. I've said Griffin 6 times in the last 12 words, but that lake is one of the most underrated of the Harris chain. It has so many dynamics. It does have a lock, but it's about 15 boats that can get through at one time. Thankfully, I think that's called the Burroughs lock. Thankfully, they're going to do the shut the lock down and do repairs in June. They were about to do it like April 5th, which is like the Friday before the Elite started. And we're like, can you what if you did it April 15th, the day after the event? Like, can we have all 8 lakes in play? Because Griffin is such a player. He said the grass looks good there, which is obviously a factor on cleaning the water up, clearer water at Griffin. He said, but there's a lot of pollen. So we're now into the spring. Pollen actually does have an impact on water clarity. So some of the water may look different in other lakes and not be as clear as we're expecting. It's not it's in a funk. It's probably getting there, and all that pollen's churned up in the water column, making it a little dingier than normal. But we think about the spawn, and we think about those massive waves where there's fish every 12 feet on the bed or something. In Florida, because they start spawning, at Okeechobee or, Halloween, Thanksgiving, they start spawning. They have trickle effects in big regions. There, you could catch any given day a fish flipping that's post spawn, a fish flipping that's pre spawn, and a fish that's on bed, all in the same area. Whereas these other lakes, it may be actual different waves pulling up into different, up on the bank, not just out in a shallow area. So when you do that, you'll have in April, May, June fish spawning, but it'll be a sprinkling, few fish here and there whenever they're going. They're not massive waves unless you get some cool weather that comes in. And right now, I think at the end of the week leading up to the practice starting, there is a cool trend going on right now. There's some cooler weather. And if that backs any fish up that we're going to maybe go spawn on their own, instead of 5, 10, 15 fish going up in a region by themselves, it holds them back, and maybe next week 30 move up. And you could see a guy get right in a pocket. You could see a guy get right in a canal. And so that's an X factor, as well as the bonus spawning fish. I don't think you can catch 4 days worth, but you could catch a giant. Oh my gosh, there's a 9-pounder right here, and you catch it and it makes your day. And people are like, look at you. And you're like, that was not an expected game plan deal. Um, Obviously, some of those little lakes have gotten a lot of run, with Carlton, Beauclair, whether it's the team championship fish off, the open, local tournaments. Those small lakes have some good recipes, but they can't handle the pressure like some of the bigger lakes. They can't absorb too many people. So that's another game plan on expecting, 2 or 3 to maybe be in a certain lake in the top 10, but not if they're going to be on the same spot. It's going to be hard to survive and do that. So some great intel there from Eric Panzeroni. And he also said he was the one who had the viral video of the boys running a no wake zone just to try to make it back to weigh in early. He had the video of the accident pulled up. So if you haven't seen that, check it out. I do not believe our boys are going to be running no wake zones or risking it like that. I think that they know exactly to a minute now what it's going to take to get to the lock, wait on the lock, get through the lock, and come back. So we'll keep an eye. Hopefully they don't push it too hard. But I think the Harris chain is going to be a good one. I don't think it's going to be 100 pounds. If it is on the uptrend of big fish are starting to show up, we could see a higher weight than normal. But I just put down as a rough guesstimate 85 3/4. That's 4 days. That is roughly, what if it was 86? If it was 88 for 4 days, it would be 22 a day. So it's like, in that 21 and change per day. I could see that being a deal. If it's a little higher than that, for sure. If we have really good a blowout day one and someone has 30, we could start to think Century Club possibly. But I think the Harris chain is going to put out good weight through the field some.
Yeah, we've been pretty close the last couple times on winning weight predictions. I actually had 82 something, I think.
Oh,
Um,
me and you
you
have been
know,
close to each other on them.
yeah. Typically,
not, not
typically, typically we're at least a little ways away. And then, the last time we were at the Harris chain, I think we were about 35 pounds away from each other. So that was
and I was
actually
about and you were about 10 pounds heavy and I was about 40 pounds heavy. It was much lighter than we thought.
that is a moment on this podcast that'll never be dropped.
Hey,
Because I think
I'm just trying to funnel viewers to Bass Live, man.
we both agreed that the weights were going to be really good. I thought the same thing too. I can vividly remember. I'll probably never forget driving away from the hotel the first morning of the tournament and looking to my right, like checking traffic and just seeing a full moon. And it was warm for like several days in a row and thinking, oh my gosh, like they are just gonna
Ronnie's
blast us.
gonna be right.
Yeah, I just assumed it was just gonna be an absolute showdown. And no, it was certainly tougher than that. But maybe this time it'll prove us wrong on the opposite end. We're guessing
Yeah.
80, then it just ends up being way better. So
I think
who
that
knows?
we're disrespecting lakes these days. If it takes 21 pounds a day to win for 4 days on highly pressured lakes, I mean, come on. That's mid 80s is nothing to shake a stick at. That is good weight for a lot of practice time, a lot of pressure time, and then to do it in a game day. So we'll see. You want to get into some fantasy predictions,
Let's do it.
or we'll talk about it? How we fared. I dropped off the map in Drain the Lake. I guess a bunch of people picked Justin Hamner, and boy, did that triple point bonus help out because I did not get the triple point bonus, and I am like 78% or something, 77%, 4,000th in the world. I got to get back in the groove. But my Rapala Bassmaster Fantasy Fishing team is I think I'm in the 98. I don't even know why I prompted us to start picking because I don't even have it pulled up. So let me pull it up. I'm at 95%. Sorry,
Oh
95
wow.
and 76. So
Rapala
Dookie.
Rapala game has just whooped my butt the last couple of years. I'm not sure why, but it seems like I've just not fared well, in there. It's been the matter of having like two or three guys extremely high, and then I mean, without fail, like every tournament this year so far, I've had a guy in the bottom like three, which just really kills your roster. But I'm at 67.2% on Rapala, gonna make a big comeback there. But like you, I dropped a little bit and drained the lake. I went from 98.9, like top 200 in the world, to not having Hamner as well and dropping to 87%. So still sitting well there, but definitely need to pick some more winners here moving up. And
It's so hard when you see someone in the classic on your team get 40th and you're like, 40th is not bad. And you're like, oh, shoot,
yeah,
there's 56. That's like an 87th in an elite. You're like, freak.
yeah,
So
it's
yeah.
tough.
So man, I had the hardest time if we're starting out with Rapala Bassmaster Fantasy Fishing. My 5-man team, I had the hardest time in Bucket B. Bucket B was like I spent 12 minutes picking my other 4 buckets and 20 minutes trying to pick that bucket. And was like, I got to pick somebody because we got to start this podcast up. I don't know what the deal is. And I could not, I convinced myself so many people that I couldn't decide which convincing was more, which was the stronger argument.
Right. Do you want to go all in line, bucket A through E, and then switch and you do yours? How do we want to do this?
Yeah, you can totally. Yeah, give me your 5. I'll give you my 5, and then we'll go through each. We'll go through each and defend or give some reasoning.
Absolutely. All right, so let's start off. I've got Jordan Lee in bucket A. Bucket B, I have Matt Airy. Bucket C, I have Drew Cook. Bucket D, we're going defending champ Buddy Gross. And then bucket E, we're going with Florida history, not necessarily at the Harris chain, but we're going Cliff Prince in bucket E. So repeat that one more time. I've got Jordan Lee in A, Matt Airy in B, Drew Cook in C, Buddy Gross in D, and Cliff Prince in bucket E.
We do not match any of our 5. I've got in A through E, I've got Corey Johnston in A, Kyle Norsetter in B, Brian Schmidt in C, Greg Hackney in D, and Caleb Kufal in bucket E. Tell me why you picked Jordan Lee. Not that there needs to be a reason why. Same thing for Corey Johnston. Not that there needs to be a reason why. We know what they're capable of.
Certainly, yeah. When you pick somebody in bucket A, you could pick them for a variety of reasons, momentum, whatever it may be. But for me, Jordan Lee's a guy that has historically done well in Florida, kind of really regardless where it's at. Has experience fishing down there later in the year. I think that's one of those things that a lot of these guys don't have. And naturally, just a great start to the year. I mean, you're thinking about a ninth and a 15th to start the year. A ninth and a 15th to start the year is like dead set going to be top five AOY. 10th in AOY right now. That's how well the top end of our field has done through two events. But
Ties
Jordan Lee,
galore in the top 10. There's so many ties.
crazy. But yeah, going with Jordan Lee in bucket A for those reasons.
Yeah, man, I think I had a feeling when I was picking it. Um, he's not going to be on my Drain the Lake. He's going to be, obviously probably for the St. Lawrence River because why not? I think Corey Johnston can win this tournament. I think that this is the one that Corey wins an Elite Series event at to tie his brother, shut his brother up, whatever you want to say. I
Shut
feel
Dave
like,
Mercer up more than anything,
yeah,
probably.
honestly, let him add that to the add that to his accolades. But I think Corey could win this. This feels like a Corey Johnston type tournament where he's flipping reeds and he goes and catches one on a top water he maybe, who knows, scopes one. If that's still a thing next week or the world ends, he'll be able to do that on some offshore grass. I don't I really trust Corey Johnston this week. Yeah, and I just actually got an email. I'll read it from Lisa Talmadge. She just sent it to the Elite guys. It says that the Burl and Apopka locks, I was talking about the lock from Eustis to Griffin and the locks from the Beauclair to Apopka. It says the St. Johns River Water Management Group said the Burl lock is fully operable, but periodically there's some issues. Apopka lock had been functioning slower at a slower rate and slower pace, but recently had divers clear out vegetation that had been slowing it down. Remember to lock at your own risk. So that's always, it's a good sign, but it is always a concern. So let's go into bucket B.
Ironically, I do
Oh, go
want to
ahead.
add this. Ironically, my bucket B or bucket A pick, I was really, really having a hard time not picking was Chris Johnston. I don't know. It kind of, I guess, for the same reasons you were mentioning, but it just seemed like, one of the Johnston brothers, you see them both sitting there in bucket A, and you're like, man, like it seems like, with their history of success in Florida, it's like this could really set up well for them.
And
But
this
no,
could,
I'm with you.
and this could be really weird because you have a lot of young guys in this bucket. So literally, as I look through, we have Wesley Gore, we have Trey McKinney, Ben Milliken, Logan Parks, Kyle Patrick, JT Tompkins, Tyler Williams. We have 7 rookies in bucket A. All of them fished the Harris chain last fall. Logan Parks had a putrid day. Oops, I just flicked off the camera. Had a putrid day, had a huge day to make the Elite Series. You had Ben Milliken, who almost won the tournament, got a top 3, I think. You had Tyler Williams, who was fishing very consistent for the 2 days and having a blast with his jig like he normally does. Had some success in one of the lakes. I think every single rookie was in a different lake. JT Tompkins, we got to see him close out AOY there. You've got Trey McKinney. I'm not sure where he was fishing in that tournament, but familiar with it. And then Wesley Gore, we saw him on camera. He was in the top 5 after day 1, and we had him on camera to see him qualify for the elites. But day 2 was an absolute struggle for him, and he was able to still make it in and get in the top 10, I think, in the tournament. So a lot of experience, even though there's a lot of rookies there, and not all of them scoped to have success at the Harris chain. So balancing that, I wonder if when we always say Florida fishing's tough, it's Florida. Brandon Polnick is like, you never know, it's Florida. That's the one thing that you don't know about. Do we know a little bit about more of it in April? Like that's my thing. Like, could we see the return of Florida limits where it's a 7-pounder and a couple twos and you got 15, or you have a 7 and a 5 and a couple twos and you've got 18? So we'll keep an eye on that. But yeah, I like Corey Johnston. For bucket A, I think he gets the dub.
I like it. Bucket B. I've got something to add to your bucket B pick as well. I thought it was very interesting. But bucket B, I went with Matt Airy. Um, had a good event at the Harris Chain the last time we were there. And you know what? I think it all the time, and I think we've talked about it on the podcast. I feel like Matt Airy, like consistently, is one of the more undervalued, anglers on fantasy fishing. Like just as consistent as can be. Is just good everywhere. Just really doesn't really have a huge weakness, but it just doesn't get talked about enough. And that combined with, like I said, a lot of his success in the state of Florida. And then also I brought up the Lake Eufaula tournament earlier, him being able to, do multiple patterns. I just think, again, I could be completely wrong and we can all look back on this and laugh at me, but like I just think that the guys that are able to have multiple patterns will have success in this tournament. And I'm not saying that the guy that wins will ultimately have multiple patterns. I mean, for all I know, it could be like the exact opposite, but it just seems like, one of those events where you could possibly have multiple things going and have success that way.
Yeah, I forgot to mention this. I don't know. I don't think he said it, but this feels like it could be shad spawn related too. I feel like we could see a Florida shad spawn. That's like we're normally there so early that we're just focused on the spawn. But
Sure.
for post spawn fish at the Harris Chain, shad spawn, plenty of hard cover for them to do. I could see that being a factor for a lot of anglers mornings, which you're going to miss that if you run into the lock to be first. But if you wait and you fish and it doesn't result and then you run, you could be 14th in line for three and wait an hour for a lock. So we'll keep an eye on that. But I feel like this could be a shad spawn thing. So bucket B, I picked Kyle Norsetter. You picked Matt Airy. I picked Kyle Norsetter. I mean, I couldn't not singling these guys out because I don't believe in them, but it's like I don't know what to make of them and their relationship with Florida and how it'll be. But like I think of Benton and I think of spawning fish. He knows how to fish Florida. He got second here in 2022, huge percentage, 29%, rightfully so. Um, Brandon Card, Hank Cherry, Clint Davis, John Garrett. Like I don't know what to think about them when it comes to um, Harris Chain in April. Justin Atkins, I don't know. Jeff Gustafson, not sure. Hudnall's going to be on my Drain the Lake. You got Cody Huff. You have Jonathan Kelly, not sure. Kobe Krieger, possibly. Got a lot of Florida experience. You just go through the list. Polinick, he hates Florida, but it's Brandon Polinick. Luke Palmer, I don't know if this is going to set up for him or not. Zaldane, Matty Wong, Schlapper. Schlapper's had success here. Who knows if it duplicates year to year? Shane LaHue. I just listed everyone in the bucket, and I feel like this style though could be Kyle Norsetter. At least he'll be a whole lot more comfortable here than other places. The
Sure.
grass, the shallow nature of it, utilizing perspective mode, some of those things could be a deal for him. We'll keep an eye on that. I have no other reason. It's 0.1%. I didn't just say, hey, I'm going to pick the lowest picked bucket guy. It just happens to be that way. But I was just like, I have no other compelling deal other than that this guy's notoriously a good angler, but 2024 has taught us that expect the unexpected. And there's a lot of factors. So who knows? Let's get out of bucket B because I'm gonna
To
convince
clarify,
my
I
I'm
was
gonna
only
convince
laughing.
myself something out of there. I don't know. I'm gonna just change the pick next. I don't know what's going on.
To clarify, I was only laughing because it was just funny the way you went through every single bucket. It was like him, maybe, Jeff
Possibly.
Gustafson, who
Yeah.
knows?
Your guess is as good as mine. Your guess
Like
is as
literally,
good.
that's I swear, like I wrote about this in my fantasy column, but that's how it was when I was making my picks too. It was like it's like
I could,
just kind of
too
scratching your
much
head.
about it.
Yeah,
You could convince yourself. Oh, it's the year of the scope. They're going to go out in the middle of the lake and find a school. I have no idea. I don't know.
just a little teaser though. The reason I my eyes perked up whenever you said Kyle Norsetter, he's on my Drain the Lake team,
Okay.
which again just a very like gut feeling, like just seems like it could set up well for Norsetter. So I just thought it was pretty fascinating that you actually had him in Rapala as well. For me, bucket C was pretty simple. Like I agree with you when you think Benton and Cook. Like anytime you're in Florida, anytime there's bedfish, like there's so many scenarios where it's like those two guys, like you could just pick one interchangeably with the other. I could just think of a dozen tournaments off the top of my head that you could easily pick one of the two or both and have success because they fish so similarly. But I think the thing that drew me to Cook was not the player percentage because it's pretty high at almost 21%, but it's like just in general, like the
Freaking
guys,
stud.
well, 100%. That's 100% fact. Again, very similar to Airy in the sense that he's just like good at doing just about everything. But the thing I keep going back to is like you almost want to look at the guys that have had, you know, history fishing in Florida, that general part of the country in April. Because again, like so many guys in our field have probably never even made a cast in Florida in April. So it's like anybody that has like any tangible experience fishing in the state of Florida in April, like that could be an advantage. Like I said, it's not so much that I think, when you pick Drew Cook or Drew Benton, a lot of times you're just thinking like, oh, the fish must be spawning. Like, that's a good bet to go with one of those two anglers. But it's just a matter of, you know, just success all over the place. But then, having, experience to at least some degree fishing in the state of Florida in April. So that's kind of my logic on bucket C.
Yeah, and I think that they just finished up as we're recording this, the that TAA touring anglers no forward facing sonar, but it's during the sight fishing season, so it's pretty straightforward on how that was won. Chris Johnston just won it, and Cook was going into this final day in second and finished fourth. So Cook's going to be having good momentum. Chris, Corey, Gussie, Fuentes, all those guys had good tournaments there and in that spinoff deal. So Cook around the spawn, Cook any time of the year, he's a freaking good angler. So I don't blame you at all. And knowing Florida, it's just making the right decision. It's am I going to go to a secluded spot and hope my fish stayed, or am I going to go to a community area? How many times do I pick up my trolling motor during a day? Because we know at Okeechobee, the more you pick it up, every time you pick it up, it's 10 farther spots you're dropping, it seems. Don't run around too much. So don't spread yourself thin, but also don't go to where there's barely a population and you only have like good enough for one day type of thing, unless you're using it and losing it on purpose and then doing your game plan for day 2, 3, 4.
And it goes back to like one thing you said earlier. It's like, you're not likely gonna, survive for 4 days catching a bedfish, but like also one of those guys that like if there are bedfish to be found anywhere, like he's gonna find them. Like I swear he finds them in December on Table Rock, or he can find them like, I'm saying that sarcastically, but like if there's a fish bedding in the lake, like Drew Cook and a handful of other guys just have a keen sense for finding them. So whether or not that's the pattern he runs like the entire time, I don't think that's going to be the case. But like if there's a guy that can like look
Bonus
around,
8-pounder.
yes,
Yeah.
exactly, and
There will
find
be
one
guys who
giant.
see one. There'll be guys who see them but can't catch them because they've been fished for. It's not the
Sure.
first wave of fish. They're a little more keen and smart. They've been caught this year. But if I have an hour and a guy slides up on one, Drew Cook's in the top 2 or 3, no doubt. On I believe they'll catch it. So I like it for bucket C. I like Brian Schmidt for bucket C. I'm trying not to just pick guys who did well here at the Harris Chain in 2022, but he did do well. He fished in a crowd and he beat a lot of people in that crowd, and he did so with multiple baits. I really expect Schmidt to keep a lot of things honest. He is the master of offshore grass or even on the bank grass. Like, he is very, very good grass fisherman. And this is the first lake that we got grass in, other than maybe Fork a little bit, and so I expect Schmidt to catch him, and I could see him really maximizing. If there's a group of fish on a clump of grass, ooh, don't make him pick up that spinning pole and a drop shot, because he will catch every one of them out of that group.
You know who I think in bucket C that is just astounding that neither of us picked, is at fairly low player percentage at only 8%. Brandon Lester. Brandon
His
Lester has
Florida
fished
his Florida history is,
insane.
I think, I don't know if I can
In
find it quick enough. It
I
was
know
like,
off the top of my head, in 3 Bass events at Harris Chain, he has 2 top 5s and a 36th or
yeah,
37th, I think. I mean, that's insane. And then a win on the Kissimmee chain has had like all these accolades in Florida. And you go back to what you were saying earlier with just fishing, like Brandon Lester is one of those guys that could easily win the tournament. Like if he finds the right deal, like he could be a factor in the tournament. And neither of us picked him, and he's not even at 10%, which is just crazy of how loaded Bucket C is really.
Yeah, and I think I'm trying to find it real quick. I'm trying to scroll. I searched Lester on my computer because I made a graphic about him and we put it on Bass Live because we had him on day one on live last year. Oh, here it is. Lester in Florida. When did I make this? I made this get info. I made this February 18th, 2022. So it was during the Harris Chain event. We obviously have fished an open down there. I'm not sure. I can't remember if he was in the open last fall. Probably was because of the division that it was in. I didn't have Okeechobee or I'm not counting Seminole. Seminoles, the takeoffs in Georgia and just the slivers in Florida. But so there's a couple events that aren't in here, but he has um, a win, 3 top 5s, 6 top 15s, and 9 top 35s in the state of Florida. And that's not just Elite Series events. Those are 200 plus boat opens fields that a lot of his top 35s are in. It is hard to do that. He's won, like you said, at the Kissimmee chain, multiple top 10s elsewhere. He is very, very consistent in a lake that's hard to be consistent at. So I like that as the underdog. I've kind of just tried to lay off Lester a little bit because he had so much pressure riding on him last year after having such good consistent career so far, and I did not like talking to him in the expo on day one of the classic. He needs to be on the water at Ray Roberts, so I'm just going to let him slide up in there into the classic cut line this year so we can see him at Ray Roberts. But yeah, that's bucket C. Would you said Cook? I said Schmidt. Both Elite Series champions. Not too
Yep.
shabby. I'll take it.
I like it.
Bucket D, man, I picked your guy and then I switched and picked this guy because I said, man, when you can get Greg Hackney on layaway, you get Greg Hackney on layaway. And Bucket D is layaway, in my opinion. A 6% in Bucket D. Sign me up for Greg Hackney. He's also very, very good in Florida as well. So that's why I went with Greg. I think that you know, he said it in an interview. Sometimes he's too stubborn and too good at fishing to embrace the technology side of it. I think that we're going to see some of that goodness fishing in this event. He's not going to have to worry about if his graphs are on or off.
Trust me, it was hard to not go with Greg Hackney and Bucket D. Obviously, not a place you're used to seeing him, and then like you said, at 6% player percentage. I mean, that's pretty insane. That could be a game time decision, honestly.
No, no, that's
Come with
my
it.
guy. You got to stay away from.
But
You picked it.
but kind of the same principle for me, at least, with Buddy Gross. I mean, when you look at it from a surface level, Buddy Gross won the last time we were there and is at 5.3 player percent. Like 5.3 for the previous winner the next time we go to a lake. I don't think that's ever happened. Like you can just book it. Whoever won the event at the previous stop of the Elite Series, when the Elite Series was at the lake itself, um, you can just guarantee just for nothing other than just obvious reasons that it's going to have a high player percentage the next time we go around. Not the case this time. And the one thing I just keep going back to is like, I realize a lot of those fish Buddy Gross was catching the last time around would have been pre-spawners, fish that have not spawned yet. Based on the fact that it's going to be a lot of post-spawn fish, based on the way we're seeing it right now, at least, like in a way, that
It's the
could
same
only help
thing.
him.
Yeah.
It could only help his
And
like
it's
his
post-spawn
abilities.
fish that have been there feeding up. They're not the weak,
Absolutely. I mean,
stigma, tough time lull. It's
you
yeah.
think of all the I mean, this is an obvious thing to say considering one, the last event that we had here, but like you think of all the things that work offshore on the Harris chain, and it's like all the things Buddy Gross is just like excellent at.
Yeah.
Uh, oh, see if he finds something consistent, and something offshore that like he feels like he can, really make last. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised to see him fishing on Sunday again. And like I said, at 5.3%, like that's crazy. I know John Cox, like there's no reason not to think John Cox would catch him. Scott Martin, obviously the same way, but But yeah, I'm gonna roll the dice here, and I'm gonna bet on the guy that knows how to catch them here already. You know, we've seen it, and obviously John Cox does too. Fished there a bajillion times, of course, but yeah, a previous champion at that low of a player percentage. That's what we're rocking with.
Yeah, I hovered over John Cox and said, "Ooh, give me
Yeah,
bucket D." John Cox looked over and said 36%. I was like, "Let me just go on by and see who else is in here." Former winner, 5%. Greg Hackney, 6%. Lee Livesey, 10%. Oh my gosh, even Scott Martin at 25%. Um, there's some guys to keep an eye on in this bucket for sure. Um, and yeah, you mentioned it. Gross and Schmidt, each of us have picked one of them. Some of the best offshore grass fishermen that you could, if you had to pick like Tom Brady's IQ and Patrick Mahomes's shoulder muscles and Josh Allen's, height and Lamar Jackson's legs. I'm picking Buddy Gross or Brian Schmidt's offshore grass ability. Like I'm just picking that. So I like it for your pick, and I don't blame people who go either way or both. Now let's get to Bucket E, because Bucket E, these guys, 2 events in, they need some love, they need some improvement. One asterisk though, we will get this right at some point. I'm gonna I'm gonna bust somebody if we don't get this right soon. St. John's or beyond. Will Davis Jr. is not a Bucket E caliber angler this year. He is up in B, and there's a reason Davis and Davis keep swapping. Clint and Will Davis swap. We used to have that problem with the Huffs. Now we've got the problem with the Davises. So Will Davis having a phenomenal year. He's in bucket B. And so if you want a guy who is not in a 2 event skid, he would be your guy. Everybody
yeah,
else needs some love.
yeah. There's no doubt. I mean, that keeps happening because the computers mix the two up, and then literally we notice it like immediately, and our fantasy fans, thanks to everybody listening, like are so on top of like making their picks immediately that
We
the
don't want to mess
percentages are
them up.
so,
Yeah, we don't
so
want to do it.
skewed. It's like it runs a bigger risk to change it. So if you've ever wondered, when you see that, that's why we don't change it back, is because it could potentially cause a bigger issue, with people not being able to change their picks and times and things of that nature. But it has certainly been addressed, and at least as far as I know, it's not going to happen again. So we'll see about that.
I love you, Kyle. I did text you 3 days after the class and said, "Where the freak is Will Davis at?" And then I was like, "Oh, he's in bucket E." I was like, I thought he's done well this year. And so, yeah, we had that conversation. But um, who you got for bucket E? I just want to put that asterisk out there because people will look and be like, "Well, he's the highest owned guy in the bucket or highest picked guy." Well, yes, that's why.
Yeah, Bucket E is tough. I mean, it's early enough in the season that you still have plenty of guys in Bucket E that won't stay there all year long.
Someone's going to make the classic from bucket E right now, currently.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's just crazy. There's a lot of big names. Um, I went with Cliff Prince, and obviously everybody's going to pick him next week, and that's okay. I will too. Um, and if you look back at his history on the at the Harris chain, it's
That's where
actually
I'm picking him next week.
it's pretty poor. It's not great. But again, I just have this feeling that having experience fishing in Florida later in the year like this is going to play a big factor. And another thing is, again, this is just my opinion. So if you don't love it, don't ride with me on this. That's okay. But when I've covered Cliff Prince a couple times now at the St. Johns River, and the one thing that stands out to me is like he's not wanting to go find bedfish. He's not wanting to go like fish. Like he knows the intricate details of fishing the shell beds, of fishing offshore grass, of fishing, little hidden type stuff. Granted, of course, he knows that stuff better at the St. Johns River than he does the Harris Chain. That's an obvious statement. But again, I'm just rolling with the fact that having, endless experience fishing in Florida later in the year, I think can be a big advantage. And that's what I'm relying on from Cliff Prince and Bucket E.
I think Caleb Kufal needs some love. I think he's man, we've seen him, win Elite Series events. We've seen him do well. He did really well in that Eufaula, Alabama. It's so funny you say that, and half our picks are guys who did well in that, shad spawn up on the bank or fishing offshore. He put all his eggs in the shallow basket and ended up prospering and having a great event there in his rookie season. But Caleb Kufal is a guy that I am keeping my eye on in this bucket. There's a lot of other guys. There's a lot of northern guys in these buckets as well. You could pick a local Bernie Schultz guy from Gainesville. You could pick a Palatka guy, Cliff Prince. You could pick a guy who's done well here last time, Cliff Perch. A Swindle, Ike and Ellie. They aren't going to stay in bucket E too long, I don't think. You got John Cruz as one in the state of Florida. So has Rick Clunn. Joey Cifuentes just had a good bounce back week in the no scope tournament and proving that he does know what he's doing on and off the water. And so I think Kufal is one of those guys that just fishing. Maybe it's canal bite. Maybe it's flipping some sawgrass type bite or a pencil grass. Maybe it's dock fishing. Who knows? But I trust that a spinnerbait, a chatterbait, a jig, or a Texas rig, maybe a buzz bait will factor well for somebody like Caleb Kufal. So he's my bucket E pick. I kind of went not saying this. It's so hard to like accurately break down these anglers without feeling like you're disrespecting them because they're the best in the game, the 100 best anglers. But I feel like I've got three safer picks in Corey Johnston, Brian Schmidt, and Greg Hackney, and my two wild cards in bucket B and E. I'm okay with doing that because the risk is there, but I think that the reward could be high because there are so many. It's not a contingent of one or two dudes. It's kind of spread through those buckets of, hey, here's 3 or 4 or 5 guys you could pick. So it's a lot minimal if you miss, in my opinion. So I'll just check in with me when I miss, and I'll let you know how minimal it was. But let's go to Drain the Lake. We already mentioned our weights, 85-10 for me. Let's go to Drain the Lake because I did use one opens angler in the classic. So I used Joey Nania. So that's one more elite guy that I'll be able to use throughout the last couple elite events. I say last couple, through 2/3 of the seasons left, to be able to pick. So that helped me a little bit, but I've got some duplicates I've got one duplicate on here, and that is Greg Hackney in my first 4. I also have JT Tompkins, Scott Canterbury, and David Gaston out of my first 4. Give me your first 4, including who might be a duplicate.
Duplicates, Drew Cook. I went with both the Drews. I went with Drew Cook, Drew Benton, John Cox, and Brian Schmidt will be my first 4.
You said both Drews, Schmidt, and Cox?
Yes.
Okay. That's a stout first 4.
Oh, I'm going all out, baby. We're either we're hitting a home run here and getting back up in
Or
the
you're done for the
95
year.
plus,
Yeah.
or yeah, we're
Yeah.
toast.
You're
But it's one of those tournaments too where I feel like I looked at a lot of the guys I haven't used, and I thought to myself, well, heck, like if I don't use them, in the next 2 tournaments, like the series, the schedule shifts obviously in different ways. So I'm buddy, I'm going all out. I'm going all out in this one.
That's why I wanted to pick the Canterbury and Gaston picks. I didn't want to try to save the Coosa River guys and try to save them for Smith or Wheeler. Like it doesn't make as much of a guarantee sense to me. And so I'm just going to pick them. If I don't see a swim jig in these guys' hands and this going on, then I don't know what we're doing. That should be something they factor. My second 4, I got another swim jig shaker with Will Davis Jr. I've got a Derek Hudnall, Clark Windlet, and Hunter Shryock. So predominantly, I'm thinking shallow, power fishing guys, swim jig guys, flipping guys in my 8. And I got one Cajun boy in there with Derek Hudnall.
So, like I said, we left off strong. We're about to pick back up strong. My final 4 will be Scott Martin, Clifford Perch, Greg Hackney, and Kyle Norsetter. As I mentioned earlier, obviously having Norsetter in my Drain the Lake.
Who was the third one you said?
Greg Hackney.
Oh, okay. So we both have Hackney and Drain the Lake. Okay. Hey, it makes me feel a whole lot better. It's hard to know when you're going to pick a Christie, hard to know when you're going to pick a Hackney. And so I'm glad we picked Hackney the same week. We actually picked Christie the same week too.
Yeah.
So yeah, my 8 is Hackney, JT Tompkins, Scott Canterbury, David Gaston, Derek Hudnall, Will Davis Jr., Clark Windlet, and Hunter Shryock. We haven't mentioned this yet. JT Tompkins done very well here. He has won here at the Harris Chain. He's fished here a couple times and he's had really good success here. So I would expect that if there's one that JT thought I could win my rookie season, it could be this one. And so I put him on my Drain the Lake. I did not put him in Rapala Bassmaster Fantasy Fishing, but for Falcon Rods Drain the Lake, I'm trying to get them double points, baby. Give me them double points.
Yeah, it's like this every year. Obviously, when you look at the guys you've used, and then you get to a certain tournament, and you're like, man, I really should have thought that one through more. And JT Tompkins would be one that I wish I probably would have thought through. However, I want to say
Where did you use him?
I think Fork, and he still did well.
Yeah, he
It
was
was
top 20.
Yeah, so I mean it worked out fine, but yeah, naturally you get to later events in the year, you're like, man, how did I already use this
You
guy?
probably loved seeing him catch a 9 pounder on Bass Track on day 3, and you thought he's gonna make the final day, and it was just a tough day 3. He didn't make the final day, but man, it was hard not to. You could catch 25 and fall at Fork.
So, so I will read off my final eight, or my entire roster. So I got Drew Bitt.
It could be your final 8, honestly, if you bomb. You know, it could
It
be.
really might be. I'm pretty much using my big guns here. But again, it's like gotten to the point where it's like, these two Florida swing tournaments, and then I don't even know. I do know what to make of the two Alabama tournaments because two lakes I've fished and or covered tournaments on a lot.
Yep.
Being later in the season though, I a lot of these like shallow power fishermen, it's like, do you really want to put a lot of merit into that in June? Is there still going to be fish caught on, shallow fishing and top waters and things like that? Sure. But like, I'm just not sure I'm going to bank all my efforts on, a lot of these shallow water power fishing guys in a June tournament, regardless if it's in the South or if it's, northern fishing. So
Yeah, I'm picking Scott Canterbury at Smith because I think he's going to flip docks for largemouth, and he's got a spinning rod and a 3-inch swim bait catching freaking spotted bass, and you're like, ah, dang it, that's not
yeah,
why I picked you, you know. So this is much more, like I said, it's much more when you pick them, you got a much better possibility of being correct on the style they may choose, or that may prevail. So yeah,
So I've got Drew Cook, or excuse me, Drew Benton, Drew Cook, John Cox, Brian Schmidt, Scott Martin, Clifford Perch, Greg Hagney, and Kyle Norsetter. That is going to be my locked and loaded.
I think the my 2022 version of Falcon Rods Drain the Lake for the Harris chain, I think I got second, third, fifth, eighth. Like I had 4 dudes in the top 10 and none got double points for me. But boy, they were all so Clifford Perch, John Cox, Drew Benton. Who got third? Um I had third place as well. Maybe it was Hanselman. It was Hanselman. I think I had Hanselman. So yeah, we got to think about that too. All right, man. I'm excited about the Harris chain. Yeah, my parents do live down there. So any angler who's been fishing previously down there, I've either gotten a selfie from my dad because he's seen him at the boat ramp, or um, I'm like, Dad, it's 3 o'clock on a Wednesday. You just drive around and look at guys at boat ramps. But then the ones who are down there, and I know that they're down there, not fishing the Harris chain, but nearby lakes. I'm like, hey, if you need anything, just know there's an avid bass fishing guy down there that could help you change a tire or something. get you get you some dinner.
Exactly.
Um,
Exactly.
cool. April 11th through the 14th, Bassmaster Elite at the Harris chain. I think it's sponsored by Lowrance. I think you said right, Lowrance Bassmaster Elite. I let Tommy handle that, so that was my bad. I should have known that off the top. I do not know. I'm so sorry for those who have hung around to this point in the podcast. I don't know who our top 6, who our 6 locked in are. I know we'll have Trey McKinney because he's AOI leader. He's tied with Ben Milliken, but in theory, if it ended today, he would have the tiebreaker, so he would be our AOI. So he's going to be our AOI guy. We're going to probably have Justin Hamner because he's a classic champ. We'll probably have like a Drew Cook on live. And then I could see a Brian Schmidt being on live, probably a Buddy Gross on live. And that sixth one is to be determined. So we'll keep an eye out. But yeah, I gave you a lot more than I thought I was about to. I thought I was going to give you 2 or 3. I just gave you 5 that I'm pretty sure we're going to have on live. So a good lineup there and a good 8 lakes for the third stop. It's weird. There's 8 lakes and there's 8 other lakes on the elite schedule. In theory, I guess St. John's has a couple extra lakes too. But yeah, should be a good one. I'm gonna let you go, Kyle. Bye.
Yeah.